Good morning, everyone. We are now at 10 o'clock Kingston time, and we will have welcome and opening remarks by Director Sadia Sanchez-Vegas, Director and Representative, UNESCO Cluster Office for the Caribbean. Thank you, Director.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Latoya. Secretaries General of Caribbean National Commissions for UNESCO, officials of Ministries of Education, Caribbean Regional Development Partners, distinguished colleagues, good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's launch of the UNESCO Caribbean Future of Education webinar series. The current global pandemic has changed anticipated futures across the globe. The COVID-19 crisis brings with it risks to education and at the same time, new possibilities, a new landscape to remake our world. As our member states mitigate the risk of the pandemic, humanity is at a defining moment for rethinking the future. The virus will not go away soon. The World Health Organization tells us that it will be with us for a long time. And that is something that all of us have to recognize. This is a fact. The new normal must become a sustainable future, meaning quality, inclusive education, well-developed health systems, a culture of safety and resilience, creative industries, a recovery economy based upon a rational and sensitive use of natural resources, and a more equitable and inclusive society grounded on human rights and based upon justice and long-lasting peace. Reflections on anticipated and alternative futures are well underway within UNESCO Futures of Education Learning to Become initiative on shaping the future together. The objectives of this series of webinars. The series of webinars in the Caribbean built on UNESCO Futures of Education Global Initiative and will explore the potential transformation in how societies, politics, economies, and even cultures may be organized in the future. An all-embracing question is, how can we reimagine and reframe education and its role in sustainable human development within the context of the Caribbean small islands development states? Learning to Become suggests that humanity has opportunities to become something it has not yet become. On a more philosophical level, becoming emphasizes potential and a flexible openness to the new. UNESCO, along with other global and regional partners, has been championing the cause systemic embodies the tenets of quality, equity, and inclusion. The Caribbean Futures of Education webinar series intends to promote dialogue and encourage decision-making around strengthening policies and strategies in the Caribbean educational mechanism to better serve the beneficiaries and stakeholders in an increasingly complex, diverse, and interconnected global community. From inception, the overarching principle of education for sustainable development, known as ESD, is to leverage the basic tenets and scope of education to create a world that is most just, peace, and sustainable, and to rethink the interactions between peoples and the planet, The principle of reimagining education is not new, but is further underscored by the current context. Today, the world is responding to the COVID-19 pandemic that has not only caused significant disruptions in education, but healthcare, life, and livelihood. This is just true for the Caribbean. UNESCO takes this opportunity to congratulate the tremendous achievements made by Caribbean countries to be responsive and agile during the pandemic and ensure the continuity of learning through distant education modalities. UNESCO's response to the pandemic in the Caribbean aligns with national priorities, namely prioritizing health, security, and well-being of students, families, and school community. Guaranteeing the right to education, especially disadvantaged and most vulnerable. Developing and strengthening the resilience of educational systems through effective policies. Furthermore, attention must also be given to existing vulnerabilities impacting the region pre-COVID, which have equal propensity to cause disruptions and shifts in education. These include climate change, natural disasters, economic downturn, socio-political unrest, mass migration and immigration. To truly reimagine education in the Caribbean, we recognize, to truly do that, we recognize and harness education as a vehicle for economic sustainability and social transformation through enabling learners to transform themselves, their society, and the environment. Empowering people to be global citizens who are proactive contributors to creating a more peaceful, secure, and sustainable world. This requires a fluid, intersectoral, and interdisciplinary mindset, a holistic mindset. Over the ensuing weeks, the Caribbean webinar will focus on 4 distinct yet interrelated pillars: human and planetary sustainability, citizenship and participation, work and economic security, knowledge production, access, and governance. At the UNESCO Cluster Office for the Caribbean, we anticipate that resulting from these exchanges, there will be a renewed trust within the Caribbean region for reframing and rescoping education towards the education sustainable agenda, known as the 2030 goals and beyond. Thank you. Thank you to all of you for your participation in this thought-provoking and pivotal Future of Education webinar series. We look forward to a greater collaborations as we move into 2021 for the recovery and further strengthening of education systems throughout the Caribbean region. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Director Sanchez, for your inspiring words and for raising those pertinent issues that we are looking at as we look ahead to a post-pandemic world with the educational disparities laid bare by COVID-19. Today, we are gathered to ask the question, what will education look like 5 years from today, 25 years from today, and further ahead? And what are some of the innovations that have been fueled by the pandemic's necessities or powered by the world's push for racial justice and equal access that will take us forward? So, what do we have? What is the work we are going to do as we work towards that future that we want to build? Because the work begins today. So with these words, I would like to invite our colleague and a senior specialist at UNESCO Education Headquarters, Professor Noah Sobey. He is a senior project officer at UNESCO Education Sector. He is leading the UNESCO's Futures of Education initiative. He's on leave currently from a faculty position as Professor of Cultural and Educational Policy Studies at Loyola University, Chicago. And he's also a past president of the Comparative International Education Society, the CIES. So we welcome you, Dr. Noah Sobey, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Farrell, and thank you, Director Sanchez, for those initial words. They're hard to follow because you've nicely sketched the ambition of the project and its importance. It's a real pleasure to join you this morning, or if you're tuning in from another part of the world, this afternoon, this evening. As was mentioned, I helped to lead on UNESCO's new flagship Futures of Education initiative, which brings us together today. I'm going to first give a brief introduction to the project, providing a little bit more context. I'll talk about how COVID has affected our work, and then I'll talk a bit about human and planetary sustainability, which is the theme of this webinar today. So at the core of the project is the question of how we use knowledge and learning to shape the futures we want for humanity and the planet. And this is an assess the state of the field, a kind of visioning exercise that UNESCO has done basically every 25 years, every generation, if you will. So the Futures of Education initiative follows in the footsteps of two previous UNESCO global reports, one from 1972 called Learning to Be, one from 1996 put together under the leadership of Jacques Delors called Learning the Treasure Within. And so whether you're familiar with these previous works or not, what's important is that in this iteration, we have an international commission, this time headed by the president of Ethiopia, Madam Sahle-Work Zewde, which frankly is a significant difference from the past. And there's also a very robust global consultation and co-construction dimension that again is why we're here today. So to sketch out a bit more of the context and ambition of the project, I want to show a very short video. So give me a second to get my screen shared here.
What kinds of futures do we want to shape? Accelerated climate change, artificial intelligence and biotechnology, increasing exclusion and fragmentation. Our world is becoming more complex and uncertain with many disruptive challenges. Knowledge and learning are humanity's greatest renewable resources for responding to challenges and inventing alternatives. Yet, education doesn't only respond to a changing world. Education transforms the world. But to create the futures we want, we must rethink education. UNESCO has launched a global initiative to reimagine how knowledge and learning can shape the future of humanity and the planet. We are looking at 2050 and beyond, and we want to partner with you to discuss, debate, and re-envision the ways education enables us to become what we want to become. For ourselves, for each other, thinking together so we can act together. Join the conversation and let's make the futures we want.
It's interesting to watch that video, and of course, you immediately notice no one's wearing masks. We made it in August, September of 2019, and you watch it now, and you really have to wonder what a post-pandemic world is going to be like. So when we began at the UN General Assembly in September 2019, I think that at the time people thought that the Futures of Education was a fine project, a very good idea, but not necessarily a need to have. Then with COVID, I think there was the sense among many that the future has arrived. The future is now. And I think we're aware that this is a very powerful moment. It's a real window of opportunity. And many decisions that are made now in the short term are going to have significant long-term future shaping consequences. So I think there are some key lessons to draw. One is that, well, it goes without saying, we were not prepared, right? But what's amazing is that every scenario's activity that's been run over the last 30 years included a global health pandemic that shut down economies, that shut down societies, that shut down schools. So we had predicted this, and I've heard someone say that it's like we were hit by the train that we've been watching come for decades. So one lesson to draw from this, perhaps, is that we can do the foresight work pretty well, but we need to get a lot better at the anticipation, at the preparation. So one thing I think COVID shows us is that successful futures literacy is about coming to terms with the reality of uncertainty. It's about recognizing that sometimes our quests, our efforts at certainty might actually get us into more trouble, and that part of anticipating the future is recognizing that it's fundamentally unknowable and open. And that's the second thing. I think the COVID disruptions have shown that dramatic change is in fact possible, because in many parts of the world, we saw basically overnight just how quickly change can occur. Of course, problems don't magically disappear, but fundamental transformations in how we organize our economic life, our social life, our educational life are in fact possible. So that transformation is possible, I think, is another lesson. And it's a very important future regarding lesson that we can draw from the pandemic. But I think there's also a risk that we could conclude that with the pandemic, we've now seen the worst, that we've now seen disruption, we know disruption, and we're prepared to face all possible futures. I think that disruptions are likely going to come over the next 5, 25, 50 years, both from expected and unexpected directions. So in this Futures of Education initiative, we think it's very important to expand our capacities for imagining multiple possible future scenarios. So possible futures might include jobless societies. They might include bioenhancement that fundamentally reshapes human beings. Possible futures might include really drastic reductions in the spaces on the planet that are inhabitable by human beings. At the same time, possible futures might also be wondrous and full of abundance. So we need to think about predicted and probable futures alongside desired and alternative futures. And as we reflect on the different ways that education might develop in the future, we should be simultaneously thinking about education for different futures. And I think that the value of unsettling and questioning and examining our assumptions and expanding the range of the possible, the value of that is that we can then bring those reflections into the present. They help inform the actions we take now. So we're very grateful to the UNESCO colleagues for organizing this series of webinars. Director Sanchez already described the topics that are coming up in the next weeks. Today our topic is on human and planetary sustainability, so I'm going to focus on that in the remaining few minutes of my talk to you today. Last week, the UN Secretary General gave a very important address at Columbia University in New York City. It was on the state of the planet, and he described the ways we act now as suicidal. He claimed that making peace with nature is the defining task of the 21st century. It must be the top priority everywhere. It should be clear to all of us, we face a choice: to continue on an unsustainable path or to change course. To go forward as things are is to permit continued environmental destruction, biodiversity loss on a massive scale. To continue as things are is also to accept unconscionable inequalities. It's to accept exploitation among human beings, and it's to continue to be awed by the promises of technology and fail to address the risks in terms of governance, who gets to make decisions about technological advances, and also would fail to ensure that technology benefits all. So to continue as is also would do nothing to address a global development crisis where too many achievements are undermined by paradox, by what's left unsolved. So for example, over the past 2 decades, global poverty levels have fallen, but global inequalities have grown. Economic growth has been more inclusive than ever, but climate change and environmental degradation have accelerated in unprecedented ways. Another paradox is that we're more closely connected than ever, but social tensions and mistrust are only increasing. Educational expansion has created opportunities for many, but it's also left vast numbers of people with low quality learning and cast out. And we are not currently on a path to solve these problems. The ways that we organize education and structure opportunity across the world don't do enough to ensure a livable planet, peaceful human flourishing, and that shared progress benefits all. So to change course, we need to re-examine what it means to be human. We need to think about what it means to have more just, peaceful, sustainable relationships with the earth, but also with each other, and with the machines, the technologies of artificial intelligence, biotech, automation. Of course, changing course means taking action in the political sphere. It means thinking about how we organize our economies, our societies, but it also means taking action through education. Changing course in how, where, why, with whom we inquire, we build knowledge, and we learn. In some of its preliminary statements, the International Commission on the Futures of Education has proposed that to turn our relationships with the planet, with other humans, with machines and technology for the better, we need to nurture education and knowledge as a global common good. And when we think about the common good, we're thinking about the shared benefit of collective action that cannot be formed by an individual acting alone. So this is the good of being in a community, both the good realized through relationships and the good of the relationships themselves. In the Ubuntu tradition that underlies certain African indigenous knowledge systems, there's the idea that a person is a person through other persons. And I think this perfectly speaks to the way the common good arises through solidarity and interdependence. In some versions of political theory, the common good is seen as forming through democratic participatory processes where people come together to realize a common cause. And frankly, the need for us all to come together to realize a common cause could not be clearer right now. Of course, what is meant by the common good varies across local contexts and conceptions of well-being. And this is maybe the moment where it's appropriate for me to underscore the fact that in this project, we use futures in the plural. It doesn't translate perfectly into all languages, but the core of the idea is that futures need to be democratically and locally chosen and made. And that we have spent too long imposing a single future on other parts of the planet. So it's really important to recognize and nurture this diversity, of course, to respect fundamental rights when people come together for shared action. And I think that we probably all agree that education systems, education institutions, educational practices have a huge potential, and it's often unrealized, but a huge potential to support lives of purpose in how they organize communities of shared learning and knowledge creation. So towards this end, we need to focus on expanding our understanding of the right to education. We should be very deliberate in mobilizing human diversity as a resource and a strength, and we clearly need to work even harder to end current levels of inequality. I mean, that I think is a useful moment to go back to the 2030 agenda, which guides us, provides the signposts, and to remember that it's an agenda for sustainable development that also prioritizes the eradication of poverty and ensuring that no one's left behind. Those things go together. As we reshape education, we need to emphasize learning to live in common, learning to care, learning to study and inquire together, and learning to collectively mobilize. So changing course is going to require the co-creation of new knowledge, new learning ecosystems. It's also going to require some unlearning. It's going to require that we dismantle some of the structures that keep us on an unsustainable path. It's going to require that we explore what prevents us from moving in the directions we want to go. And to change course, it means we need to explore where there are seeds of possibility, where there are promising moves already heading in the right directions emerging, and how we can support those. So we achieve change and we'll be on a path towards better futures when we tip the balance. So I'll close with that and hope this was a helpful launch, and look forward to the conversation that goes on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Noah. Changing course takes action in the political sphere, in economies, and also our education systems. And that is one of your key messages for us today. And then the question is, what are some of the decisions that we will take today that will shape our future? What are some of the factors, both positive and challenging, which will determine a sustainable future for all of us? So you've raised some really, interesting food for thought. And with your words, we are now so looking forward to inviting Mr. Vincent Sweeney, who is the head of the from the UNEP, the United Nations Environmental Program. Mr. Vincent Sweeney is the head of the Caribbean Sub-Regional Office. He is currently head of the sub-regional head of regional office for UNEP. And previously you were based in Nairobi, Kenya for 4 years. So you have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in civil engineering from the Technical University of Nova Scotia. So we look forward to your presentation, and especially focusing on environmental vulnerabilities and threats to regional sustainability. So thank you so much, Mr. Vincent Sweeney, for your presentation today.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Observing all protocols, and recognizing the presence of the new director, who I haven't met yet, of UNESCO for the Caribbean, my next door neighbor. But of course, we recognize the times that we are in. So ultimately, we will certainly get together. My talk this morning is going to highlight some of the vulnerabilities in the region and try to put them in a particular context, and then maybe if I have a couple of minutes at the very end, just tell you a little bit about what UNEP is doing in that regard. I was smiling when the previous speaker mentioned the same quote that I had on my first slide, which is a quote from the Secretary General of the UN, who made this made this presentation, of which one of the quotes was extracted. And it's one of the reasons why organizations like UNEP actually exist. We are intended to set the global agenda, to promote sustainability.
Hello. David, are you with us? Hello, we've lost Mr. Sweeney.
Yes, Farial, I am seeing that we have, oh, Vincent is back with us.
He's with us.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Vincent. Thank you. Vincent, we're not hearing you, but we are seeing you, and we see that you are speaking.
And you're not?
Yes, I'm sorry. I think internet dropped in the middle of my presentation. Are you hearing me now?
Yes, we are, and we're seeing you as well. So we're going to invite you to.
My screen.
Yes,
Okay,
share your screen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was speaking to the challenges.
Yes.
That's right. But we've lost the presentation. Would you like to put it back on? The screen is not being shared anymore. Perhaps you would like to share your screen again. Thank you.
That's it.
That's perfect.
Unfortunately, I keep getting kicked out, so I'm going to try and move through the slides as quickly as I can, because every time I change slides, I get disconnected. But yes, I was speaking about UNEP and the reasons why UNEP exists. And I'm trying to advance my slides, but it does not seem to be working. I'm going to start.
I'm going to ask if our technical colleague is with us. David Jenkins, are you with us?
Hi, Vincent. Morning again. Try restarting Zoom and see if that works.
Yeah, it's actually restarted twice already. So I'm going to try to do the presentation without my video, without my, well.
Could David project? David, could you project the presentation on screen, or?
Sure, I could.
Please, would that be helpful, Mr. Sweeney?
I'm gonna give it one more try and see.
Maybe we let David project it.
Are you seeing the screen now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna give it now. I was speaking to why UNEP exists in the context of these global challenges, particularly those related to environmental vulnerability. I'm trying to link it to the work of UNESCO and of this particular webinar, where we are intended to advocate as well as inform and enable countries, including, of course, the peoples, through various means, including education. And the context in which we operate in the Caribbean, I wanted to highlight for those who may not be aware of the regional UN agenda, which is referred to as a multi-country sustainable development framework. And it identifies a number of challenges, some of which relate to the environment, including inadequate natural resources management, challenges related to adaptation to climate change, issues of water, sanitation, other forms of pollution, disaster risk reduction, looking at managing resources more efficiently, particularly energy resources, and of course, environmental information and data collection. And these link very nicely with what UNEP as an organization seeks to do across the world, and particularly in the Caribbean. But in the context of the Caribbean, we know that we are largely small and developing states. And we are also probably aware of the unique biodiversity in the region and the challenges that this biodiversity and the natural resources face from a number of factors. And of course, the impacts on economic development. So the same challenges that were identified in the MSDF, the natural resources management, water and sanitation, etc., are very much considered to be prevailing vulnerabilities in the Caribbean, which is the focus of this presentation. And the next few slides are just going to highlight more in terms of pictures, some of the challenges that we are facing. We are facing issues related to a coastal environment and overfishing, our land resources, including agricultural practices which are degrading the environment, not only the land, but the waters and eventually even the coastal zone. And of course, deforestation and changes in the habitats of many species have led to threats to biodiversity, which I'll come back to later. We're probably also familiar with the challenges related to water and sanitation. We don't tend to think so much of chemicals, but chemical pollution as well. And for those of us in the Southern Caribbean, will be very familiar with the challenges recently regarding a potential oil spill in the Gulf of Paria off the coast of Trinidad, where a vessel was feared to be leaking oil at the time. So in addition to our traditional sewage and other forms of wastewater and air pollution and solid waste management, we also have to be concerned about pollution of our water supplies. And of course, the matters of marine litter and plastic pollution are very familiar to many of us. We also have challenges related to where, in fact, our water resources are distributed. A good example is Jamaica, where a lot of the rain falls in the north of the island. In fact, the northeast of the island, in the Portland area. But the majority of the population is in the south of the island, in the Kingston and St. Andrews area. So therefore, the challenges include not only having enough water, but getting that water in a safe manner to people because of the various distribution challenges. In addition, we have, as mentioned already, pollution from many sources, including our water resources, and it ends up sometimes in our water courses and gullies, and in many of our islands, which are very small, whatever is polluted on land in our oceans. We also have challenges related to portage, which is partially discharged into the environment. We still find that that it is causing pollution. This is just something to break up the monotony of my presentation. But we also deal with issues related to pollution of our coastal zone and the impacts on our coral reefs, which are not just there for aesthetics. We don't always realize that the coral reefs reduce storm surges and protect our coastlines from erosion, as well as serve as a major tourist attraction. And pollution, including excessive nutrients, is affecting coral reefs. We have land pollution, which we're very familiar with, and some of that land pollution ends up impacting our coastal zones. And I use the opportunity to dispel the myth that used to be circulating in the region that a lot of the garbage that we see on our shoreline is coming from ships, when in fact the majority of it is in fact not coming from ships, but coming from us when we discharge our waste either out the window of a vehicle or into a gully or stream, and it ends up on our coastline. And this impacts on our marine life, among others. This is one of the products that we've recently developed to highlight the specific challenges related to waste management in Caribbean SIDS. And it notes that some of the priority waste streams include plastics, disaster waste, tires, hazardous waste, and other construction waste. Another challenge we face is having access to clean energy and implementing measures that will allow us to exploit that energy. And we also need to be looking at, for example, fuel efficiency. When we improve our fuel efficiency of our vehicles, that reduces air pollution and it also reduces greenhouse gas emissions. So we're looking at measures such as electric mobility across the region. We're looking at improving our efficiency for cooling and looking at options such as solar water heating and generating of electricity through photovoltaic. And of course, we are very familiar with the challenges related to disaster risk reduction. Unfortunately, the time available to me doesn't allow me to go into a lot of details on these various challenges, but we know that this hurricane season has been one of the busiest on record and the most named storms in history. And we have a very significant chance in each of our islands of being struck by a hurricane every single year. And in addition to hurricanes, of course, we have flooding and we also have droughts. Climate change has been mentioned already. And again, in the interest of time, I can't go into a lot of details, but just to mention that we are getting hotter and drier in the Caribbean. The challenges, in addition to severe weather, include sea level rise that impacts on our shoreline. It affects our water supplies. It can cause our land to subside into the ocean. And in response to all of this, I just wanted to highlight a couple of issues. One, that even prior to the COVID pandemic, we have been, as a previous speaker mentioned, been preparing for scenarios and predicting scenarios like this. So back in 2016, we actually looked at the impact of ecosystems and the degradation of those ecosystems on the potential for zoonotic diseases such as COVID. And at the time, our scientists were identifying that there are some very specific linkages between biodiversity and zoonosis. Of course, COVID-19 was not around, but prior to that, there were other diseases of concern. And these are some of the products that have been developed in order to address some of the implications of COVID-19, including looking at healthcare waste, treatment technologies for destruction of waste, and among other things, a focus that we are promoting on building back or building forward, as some are referring to it, better and greener as an opportunity that is presented from the COVID pandemic. I want to quickly move on and in one or two slides speak to the work that we are doing at UNEP with respect to youth and education. We have what's called a Youth and Education Alliance, and it focuses on both the formal education system and the non-formal education system, and of course, naturally focusing on youth, keeping them at the heart of our work, and working with various alliances. And we've actually evolved from what was the Global Universities Partnership on Environmental Sustainability to actually what's now a Youth and Environment and Education Alliance, which includes experts as well as core membership from a number of institutions. This Youth Education Alliance includes universities, so it seeks to support higher education institutions to green their campuses. It focuses on, of course, behavioral change as well as advocacy and raising the profile of higher education as a change agent with a focus on collaborating to promote youth leadership. And therefore, this webinar that we are a part of is very much in keeping with the work that we're doing under our Youth and Education Alliance. A couple of the products that have come out of that work includes what's referred to as a little book of green nudges, which is essentially a user-friendly way of promoting behaviors within university campuses. It is available online, and you can go to unenvironment.org/nudges to get more information on that. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter, unenvironment.org/YEA. And of course, in the time available, I haven't been able to go into a lot of details on the many projects that we are involved in, seeking to address all of those challenges that we face as part of the work in the Caribbean region. But I'm hoping that when we get to the discussion section, we'll be able to elaborate on any particular concerns. So apologies for the little technical glitch. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'm open to questions at the appropriate time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vincent Sweeney. This was very interesting because you raised a lot of environmental issues such as the adaptation to climate change, water and waste management, the pollution of the coastal zones, and also some of the specific environmental challenges specific to the small island development states, such as the disaster risk reduction and mitigation, and the impact of the ecosystems on the environment. So our interest is, I hope during the discussion, we will be able to look at some of the implications of these challenges for the education systems. And then what should the curriculum in education systems, how some of these issues can be addressed through curriculum, through educational activities, so that the youth, and I like very much the Youth and Education Alliance, and we should definitely, we hope we will have opportunities to work together around those issues. To take this dialogue further, we are very pleased to invite our colleague Mr. Massimiliano Lombardo, who is our program specialist in natural sciences at the UNESCO Cluster Office for the Caribbean. Mr. Lombardo holds a bachelor's and master's degree in biological sciences from the University of Modena, Italy, and has a postgraduate specialization degree in environmental management and land use planning from the University of Brasilia in Brazil. And prior to your current position, you were working with UNESCO in Brazil and Indonesia. So the floor is yours, Massimiliano, and we look forward to looking at how we can create better linkages with science and education. So thank you.
Thank you.
Your presentation.
Thank you very much, Fariel, and good morning to all participants. After Vincent Sweeney's overview, a very good one about environmental vulnerabilities in the Caribbean, I will have a specific example of how UNESCO is working here in the Caribbean, has been working on science education. So I will share my presentation. But I will switch off my camera while I present to avoid possible problems, okay?
Sure, so, thank you.
Okay, so do you see the presentation?
Yes, very clearly. Good. Thank you.
Okay, so I will tell you about science education for the promotion of human and planetary sustainability in the Caribbean, as I said, through a specific example. But first of all, to understand to frame this discussion and to understand why I will show you a particular example, is that we need to reflect on the fact that when we talk about human and planetary sustainability, we need to think in terms of health and well-being, the human populations and of our common planet Earth. And nowadays, we know that the biggest threat to human and planetary health is probably climate change. So climate change is increasingly affecting what human populations need the most for their health and well-being. I mean, clean air, safe drinking water, food, secure shelters. So people who live in the Caribbean, small island developing states are particularly vulnerable because of several threats and vulnerabilities. Many of those I think all of those were highlighted by Vincent Sweeney. So rising temperatures, ocean acidification, rising sea levels, the increasing magnitude and frequency of extreme weather events such as hurricanes and storms, and climate-related disasters like tsunamis are just some of the impacts of climate change in coastal zones and small islands. And also in the Caribbean, this is very true. Those impacts of climate change are particularly affecting, as I said, coastal zones and beaches. So some beaches like Hellshire in Jamaica that you see in the picture have been particularly affected, especially by the growing erosion caused by the rising sea levels and also by pollution. You can see a bit of it in the image, and that's why it's very important to focus on some environments, some ecosystems, to understand the impacts of climate change and related disasters. But beaches are also good places, to put into practice the concept of education for sustainable development through science education initiatives. So in this regard, I will briefly tell you about the Sandwatch project, an example of what UNESCO has been doing here in the Caribbean since 2001. So Sandwatch is a science education initiative that has been applied in several school settings across the world, mainly in coastal zones. And in the Caribbean, it was launched in St. Lucia in 2001, and it has been carried out in most Caribbean islands since then, involving almost 200 primary and secondary schools, and some universities, environmental organizations, and local communities. It engages teachers, students, young people, their parents, and communities, protection and preservation of the coastal areas, including beaches, waterways, and wetlands. School students and community members learn and work together to scientifically monitor the natural environments, take action to promote their conservation, build resilience to climate change. They do this through this massed approach: measure, analyze, share, and take action. It's a methodology that has been successfully applied in by the different schools. So what happens is that using a manual that you can see in the middle of the screen, the cover, the teachers work with the students, and they adopt a local beach, and they take a series of regular periodic measurements and tests on the beach, using simply and readily available equipment and simplified scientific protocols. So there are some activities in particular that help, to do those, monitoring. One of those is finding out how climate change can affect beach users. And in this activity, the massed approach consists of 4 steps. So first of all, teachers brainstorms with the students on how they think climate change is affecting the beach. Then they design a questionnaire to find out how the beach users will respond to 1 or 2 of the most relevant climate change impacts. In which environments, for example, 2 of the most evident ones are the beach erosions that I mentioned before, and the coral bleaching. So they can also do observation underwater, but also on the beach. They then tabulate the results of this questionnaire. They discuss the responses with the students, and they ask them if they expected those results. And finally, 4th step is that the students decide what to do with the results of the questionnaire. They can share those results with the government authority, and then help to sensitize government officials about specific threats from climate change. But also there are activities that promote awareness and preparedness for disasters such as tsunamis. So you can see as an example the sign of tsunami alert. So teachers promote participatory research and discussion with the students about tsunami. They learn about tsunami science in their community, and also about the alerts, how to understand if a tsunami could be coming, and doing basic calculations about how many houses and people might be in danger if the water extends 1 kilometer or even more inland. So to conclude, I would say that to help ensure sustainable futures for human and planetary sustainability, we need to take urgent action to combat climate change and its effects. This is our Sustainable Development Goal 13, climate action. So to this end, UNESCO believes that science education initiatives need to involve students inside and outside their classrooms, and make them interact with the local environment, their community, so that students become more aware and engaged on global and local challenges, such as climate change and related disasters. And so science education initiatives like Sandwatch can help school teachers to be empowered to act as a sort of bridges between climate scientists, students, and communities. And this is important to contribute to human and planetary sustainability. In this regard, to conclude, it is important to note that in 2014, at the end of the United Nations Decade of Education for Sustainable Development, Sandwatch was also recognized as one of the 25 success stories around the world in terms of education for sustainable development practices. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm available for the discussion afterwards.
Thank you so much, Massimiliano, for your excellent presentation, and which really focuses on the, perhaps you want to stop sharing the screen, or?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But I like that message, to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. So that's a very important message for us. I think it is very important for us. Thank you for sharing Sandwatch, because how can then science education, raise awareness amongst students, learners, on some of the environmental issues, enable them to observe and analyze climate change, its impact on the environment, and then I mean, it gives children the first-hand experience of actually being out there and making observations for themselves. So it would be interesting for us to learn lessons from these excellent examples, which have been already implemented and carried out, especially in the Caribbean region. So thank you so much for sharing these with us. And then what are then the implications of these programs as we plan for future, for education of the future, and how can we strengthen these linkages? And so that at this point, I'm seeing programs such as Sandwatch are not necessarily part of mainstream education systems. And then from being more at the edge, how can we bring these initiatives as part of the core educational curriculum, so that it's not just available, so that these experiences are not just available for a few select learners, but to all children, because these are issues that they are addressing in their environment. So thank you so much, Max.
Thank you.
And this has been very enlightening, and thank you for staying on for the panel discussion afterwards. But it is really my pleasure now to invite Miss Maria Marshall. She's 11 years old. She's a secondary school student from Barbados. Miss Maria, are you with us?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Would you like to turn on your camera so that we can all say hello to you? Wonderful. Miss Maria is Barbados' UNICEF Changemaker, and she is the island's youngest award-winning female filmmaker. So well done, Maria. And you are a very thoughtful and a kind young lady who sees the need to advocate for your environment. So we are so delighted to have you with us. And the floor is yours, and we would love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on today's webinar?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me and allowing me to share my little thoughts on some of these very big matters. I am only 11 years old, but I am old enough to understand some of the things that are going on around me. And for sure, even if I do not fully understand things, I definitely feel these emotions that are flowing around me. I am from the very small but very special and beautiful island of Barbados. Barbados is only 166 square miles in size, but has been trying, as far as I can see, to keep itself ahead in terms of technology, health, and education. I recently transitioned into secondary school from my primary school this past September. It has been, well, let me just say, a very interesting move. As we all are very aware, the entire world has been so terribly affected by this COVID-19 pandemic, and it seems that no one has escaped its outcome. I began a new school term in an online class and never was really given the proper orientation into my new school. I also ended primary school life online, so it was like I just changed passwords. Honestly, it was not what I had been looking forward to, and it felt like a very cold transition. But I transitioned nevertheless. I considered myself quite social, and although online classes at my secondary school are very well organized, and the teachers make classes as interesting and as enjoyable as they can, it still feels empty. I do go to physical school some days during each month, but it is like you are getting to know everything all over again. And I cannot really connect with any of these new students because we seem to be breaking the ice when we meet, and it seems to freeze over until we meet again. It is a strange feeling, but I guess it is the new norm. It may perhaps be different for those that were friends before COVID. I guess you could call those pre-COVID friends. However, I do not want to plant a doom and gloom picture of everything here in Barbados, because that would not be the truth. Yes, things have been different. And yes, this whole COVID-19 situation is definitely one that we will remember and we will have repercussions from for some time to come. But for me here in Barbados, it has made my family come closer together, and I've learned to live without certain things. And my parents have really taught me the seriousness of financial budgeting. As COVID-19 has really caused financial stress on my family at this time, I could sit and cry over what I have lost, but I am choosing to cherish what I have and what I have learned from it all. I know my situation has been so much easier than that of other children here on the island, and I am grateful to my parents for rallying around me and each other during this time. I see what counts and I see what matters. COVID-19 was a lesson that we all had to endure at different levels, and it revealed a lot. What are our priorities and what do we need to protect and care? I honestly tried not to think too much about how different my school life is from what it might have been if there was no COVID-19. I tried to make the best of what I am working with, even if it is difficult. I always try to make my thoughts be as positive as possible and seek out the solutions to issues and not just complain about stuff. Now, this leads me into my little thoughts on the matter of human and planetary sustainability. We only have one environment, so we must put all our little thoughts together to protect it. I know this message is really simple, but I find that people, or at least adults, make some things very complex. And I sometimes think no one really wants to solve any of the world's issues at all. Perhaps this is just my childlike view of things, but the way I see it is, if we need to stop doing something bad, to save the world, why don't we just do it? My mother is a counselor, and she explained to me, to change a behavior, whether bad or otherwise, it takes a lot of conscious effort on the person, because they may be happy doing what they're doing. Therefore, I think it is how we think about things has to change. For some reason, we must think that damaging our environments has some benefit to us, or that the superficial gains we get, like money and power, are worth the world. But can you really put a price on our planet? It scares me to think that you can without the home that is not just a home of a few, but the home of millions of others, people, animals, and plants. Like my little thoughts on Big Matters video spoke to the fact that we are making things seem really difficult, but we just need to reduce the consumption of things we really do not use or buy. And this would have immediate and very positive outcomes for the environment. Eat what is in season and from where you come from. This would create a chain of great outcomes. For those who have land, they would grow their own, and we could buy local foods that are grown in the right way with no pesticides and mistreating of the land. We would be a whole lot healthier too. Reuse. Now this is one I find no one really likes to do, as we think it makes us look like we're not wealthy enough to buy the new or the latest. I find we are very focused on the whole vibe of consumerism. Everyone likes new and pretty, but at what expense? Recycle. This could be a whole industry with many angles and tied to the notation of reusing, but with a different vibe. Repair. This is my favorite, and I think it has to do with my personality because I tend to get attached to things and I do not want to part with things. Like I like something and I just can't let it go. I cannot, nor do I want to get into the politics of sustainability, but I know that the decision to save our environment is one that we all make every day with the simple decisions that surround our everyday lives. Even if we found a brand new world somewhere out there in space, if we take the same ways of thinking with us, we would find ourselves back at this very point. I think it was Albert Einstein that said, "We can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them."
Thank you so much for your very, very wise messages, Maria. You've given us some very key, some very interesting food for thought. Let us consume less. Let us recycle, repair, and a shift away from materialism, but a focus more on a sustainable environment. Because we are all living in the same world. We have one world, we have one environment. These are very strong messages that you have shared with us. And also another message that you've shared with us is very important, I think, as we plan for the future of education is, that with this COVID and the current situation, students are feeling a crunch. Even though you are connected, you feel it's empty. And how can then, in the future, as we plan for the future of education, how can we have more enriching spaces, even if they are virtual spaces? How can students feel connected and have a more wholesome experience so that you don't feel empty, that emptiness that you were referring to in your, because of working from home and working online. So thank you so much. I mean, you've given us a lot of food for thought, and we appreciate your sharing these messages with us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we have with us Mr. Akeem Campbell, who is Mr. Akeem, are you with us? Mr. Akeem Campbell, are you with us now, or maybe there's a connectivity issue?
So we are checking on it, Fariel. He is on, yes.
Yes.
Hello. Are you seeing and hear?
Yeah. Welcome. So you are a final year actuarial science student at the University of West Indies Mona campus and the director of research and response in the Faculty of Science and Technology. And you also represent the parish of St. Mary in Jamaica, where you attended the St. Mary High School. So welcome with us today, Akeem. And we look forward to hearing from you. What are your thoughts on the future of education as we look at issues of sustainability?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. Even though I'm a university student, I particularly wanted to, if at any point in time you cannot hear me, just let me know. Even though I'm a university student, I particularly chose to look on high school and how the curriculum there can be used to re-image the future of education. And I chose to look on high school because university students are usually already developed people who are there to learn and just to become better persons. So I think in high school, their students' mind are ready to be molded. And so some of the issues with students' views or students' view of education, or rather the environment, is that they see their treatment of the environment as something that's negligible. So if they do something that's bad, one of the common ones would be to dispose of garbage improperly. They see that as just a drop in the bucket. And if they try to do something that's good, it doesn't make a difference. That's how they feel. And again, they feel as though there is no real-time benefit to doing anything good. Because if they do try to make some improvements to the environment, they're not going to really benefit from it. it's going to be someone in the future. So it's problems in terms of those views that students have that cause some issues. And so the aim then is to see how we can alter the curriculums that students' views can be better. Now, how schools so far have chosen to do this is they have established clubs such as the environmental club. They encourage students to keep the school clean and to keep the classroom clean, and they discuss at times the impact of climate change. But the fact is, this isn't sustainable. And this isn't a sustainable way of having students get a proper view of caring for the environment. And this became obvious during the pandemic, when all of those efforts that they would have made before would have been shown to not have any effect now, because with school online, they can hardly do any of those things. So what I noted was that other than encouraging academic proficiency, schools attempt to, every school attempts to create functional adults, and that is their aim. But particularly here in Jamaica, the main way that they try to create functional adults is by focusing on dressing and grooming. But there's so much more to it than that. And one of the things that's involved is actually creating adults who have the mind frame to care for the environment. And so to do that, they have to really affect culture. So instead of having one-off projects that seek to just carry out something and then you stop there, they have to do things that actually alter students' perception. And another reason why this does not work is because of the type of discussions that they have. I mean, the PowerPoint that Mr. Vincent Sweeney, I think he showed, as someone who was in high school recently, I can tell you that back in high school, I did not know many of those things. When we spoke about climate change, one of the first things that would come to the mind of many Caribbean students is ice caps melting. Yet we do not have ice caps here. This is totally tropical. So the fact is, they do not make climate change a problem discussed in a Caribbean context. The students know more about ice caps melting than they do about the mangroves in Jamaica. Students know more about the Sahara dust than they know about hurricanes in the Caribbean. So it's important that they do this. So what changes they can make would be, they can build more confident thinkers. Climate change. Oh yes, one other thing that they can do is, entrepreneurship is a huge thing on students' mind now. And so what they should help students to see is the fact that a good entrepreneur is one who sees a problem and attempts to fix it. And one of the problems that we are having is with climate change and all kinds of environmental issues. And so if students can find new and efficient ways of correcting problems that are actually environmentally friendly, that can make the world a better place when it comes to climate change and environment, then that would actually help them. So those are some changes that I think that we can make in the Caribbean, particularly Jamaica. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for your sharing your thoughts, Akeem. You've shared some very valuable ideas with us. And you've also warned us that some activities like environmental clubs, which are very much present, you don't think those are sustainable at all. And what you are advocating for, in fact, is a paradigm shift in the mind frame to care for the environment. And you want to alter students' perceptions about how they care for the environment. And that takes, and so what are then the implications for education systems? What are the implications for teachers, for the curriculum specialists, so that they can prepare the curriculum in the future in such a way that they have activities and content that enables young learners to actually alter their perceptions and to care for the environment? So these are very, very pertinent questions. And thank you so much for sharing them with us. What we would like to do now, thank you. And we would now like to invite the panelists to perhaps switch on their cameras, and we would like to open up the floor. So Mr. Sweeney, Massimiliano, Maria, and Akeem, you are with us now. And we would like to request the attendees to, if they have any questions, to share them through question and answer or through chat, whatever you prefer. I can begin with one question which I will put to the, all of to our panelists. So we've spoken a lot about a lot of environmental issues that are faced by the small island development states, in the Caribbean SIDS. And in some, as we look at education, the future of education, let's say 25 years from today, but let's say 25 years from today, or even beyond 2050, what are some key factors that would enable us to raise greater awareness amongst students to care for their environment, as Akeem has highlighted? Mr. Vincent Sweeney, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I very much enjoyed the last two presentations and getting that perspective from the youth. And I think it was quite instructive that that Akeem, who is now at university level, was frank enough to say that what we are teaching young people is really not necessarily Caribbean contextualized. And it's one of the things that I have been advised by my education experts within UNEP to highlight, that in fact we really should be focusing on things like traditional knowledge, lifelong learning, so not just when you're preparing for exams in primary or secondary school, but also look at the specific sustainability challenges facing the Caribbean, and also identify some of the solutions, because we are very good at identifying what the problems are. And I was smiling when Maria also noted the point that that it's not just to highlight the problems, but to also identify what we can do about it so that young people can feel empowered. And I just wanted to say that I was very deliberate in my slides. You may not have realized in my presentation that it was about 30 slides. Very few. In fact, all of the text might have been able to fit onto one slide, because I have realized that visuals are much more impactful than a lot of text, which persons don't have a chance to read in a presentation. And these are real life situations. I try to get backdrops like Kingston Harbor, so Akeem might have recognized downtown Kingston from Port Royal on one of the slides. So it's not something that we're taking from Philippines or India or somewhere in Europe. We are taking things from our region, getting our personnel involved, seeing their pictures, high-profile people actually being concerned about and hopefully doing something about the issues. Because the reality is that that climate change has more of an impact on us in the region in terms of real-life scenarios than it does on the Arctic or the Antarctic. We really should be emphasizing what those impacts are in a real way. And one last thing I wanted to mention before handing back the floor is that that I was giving a presentation a few months ago. Actually, I was going to say a few weeks, but since COVID, time seems to fly. A few months ago, actually, to a group of mature gentlemen, a men's group, and I was talking to them about climate change. And one of the responses was one of the slides which I used in the presentation spoke to a change in temperature of 0.5 of a degree, which to scientists means a lot, but to the average person, saying that if the Earth increases by 0.5 of a degree, what's the big deal? When in fact it is. So even something like that, we need to frame things in a way that will make people realize what that 0.5 of a degree actually means in real terms. You know, it's going to result in sea level rise. Is it going to result in more catastrophic hurricanes on our islands? You know, there are different ways of saying the same thing that will resonate with different audiences. And I think that's one of the challenges. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We have another question from Latoya Swaby Anderson to all the panelists. What current opportunities can be leveraged to advocate for greater awareness and responsibility amongst children and youth? Who would like to take that question? Maybe suggest perhaps Akeem, would you like to say what would be some, and perhaps Max, you could begin and perhaps Akeem could follow. What current opportunities can be leveraged to advocate for greater awareness and responsibility amongst children and youth for a sustainable future? So Max, the floor is yours, and then we'll give the floor to Akeem.
Well, I think actually Akeem probably will tell us something more inspiring, but I will say, first of all, that it's important to provoke a sense of belonging of children and students to the place where they live. And then they can understand from some examples how global problems and challenges like climate change, disasters, etc., can be understood from the observation of what is happening in their surroundings. So I gave the example of sandwatch and beach environment, but the same can be done also in along rivers or any other environmental ecosystem that the students are familiar with. So I think in terms of opportunities, probably it would be very important to understand what are the places and the ecosystems that students are more familiar with, and then use those as, you know, like school outside the school, places where the teachers can go together with the students, and so students can ask questions, they can be prepared before they go, you know, doing some readings, and then they can bring to the place some instruments, some you know, some tools that they can use to do those sort of investigations, let's say field investigations. They can take parts of the soil, for example. They can analyze together with the teachers in the laboratory, or they can observe which animals, which plants are there, and try to identify them.
Thank you so much, Max. That is, I fully agree with you. We need to expand the walls of the classroom to go beyond the school into the environment, and to let learners have the first-hand experience to observe, to analyze, you know, environmental phenomena in the real world, to then to see what possible solutions might be. Thank you so much. And Akeem, the floor is yours. And then I will have a small question to ask Maria before we wrap up. So Maria, I'll be asking you a question also. Go ahead, Akeem.
Oh, and one important thing that we shouldn't do is to limit the actual potential that education has on molding students' minds. In fact, I remember when I was in high school, I just thought I was a Jamaican and that was it. And when I did this one course called Caribbean Studies, after doing that course, I no longer saw myself as just a Jamaican. I saw myself as a Caribbean citizen who had the responsibility of developing my region and not just my country. And so similarly, I think education should be the fact that you have students, you've taken students from their homes, you have them in a classroom for about 8, or you have them on a compound for some 8 hours, and you have them for 7 years, 5 to 7 years, for 8 hours a day. You have an opportunity to mold your thinking. So education can really be used to do that. Whenever they have any general meetings, that's where you should speak about, that's where you should talk about how they can help the environment. That's where you should particularly talk about how they can come up with new ways of making the environment less of a target to bad habits or of bad habits. So yeah, for the most part, I'm thinking that yes, we should really leverage education. And one last point too is that when it comes to the future of education, I was not particularly one to say I'm for online school. I did not want online school. I wanted to go back to stuff, but that did not work out. But I'm starting to enjoy it. I'm so flexible with my time. Had I been in school face to face, I would not be able to make it here. And so I say that to say, many students, if the future of education really is going to be online for many students, especially here in Jamaica, we won't really get to take advantage of the fact that they're going to be in a classroom being educated for so many hours in the day, because many of them can't access it. They do not have internet. They do not have devices. So it's important not only that we use the tool available, but we make the tool actually accessible to students.
Thank you so much, Akeem. That I fully concur with you. And we have a very important point from Vincent Sweeney and from UNEP. Thank you so much for sharing this. You are really summing up the, and I may, if you will allow me, this as part of the concluding remarks, that the aims of the Earth School are threefold, you say. And this is when we look ahead at the future, school education systems or schools first help parents, teachers, and pupils to feel the awe and wonder of nature, especially in these times of COVID-19, but also looking ahead into the future. Secondly, to understand how intertwined we all are with the planet, and to see how we can all live cleaner and greener lives. So this is really looking ahead, and thank you so much for sharing these comments, Vincent. And Akeem, your comments about being global citizens, you lead us also very nicely to our next webinar, which will take place in January, which looks at citizenship and the role of youth and learners in finding solutions and becoming active citizens to find solutions in their communities around, whether it's environmental issues, but also non-environmental issues, to other challenges that we are all facing today. So I think your comments lead us very nicely to our next webinar. Ms. Maria, if I may ask you, you are an advocate for environment and you have worked on these issues. If you were to close your eyes and to think about education and your school, what do you think your school can do to help environmental issues in the future? Can you think of one or two ideas you would like schools?
Yeah, we could probably like put more garbage cans in the area and to bring in the children more, make them feel a part of climate change and how they can help it by painting the garbage can. So, and I know art has a very excellent way of bringing in little children especially. So that's my ideas.
Great ideas. Bringing in the school community to paint the garbage cans, have a more creative project around having a cleaner, healthier school environment, which will then, and that very concrete activity, Maria, at the school level, will then raise awareness about larger climate change issues and larger environmental issues. So every small step matters. Wonderful ideas. And I hope we can take these ideas and share them with schools, not just in your country, in Barbados, but also perhaps in other parts of the world. Thank you to all panelists, to all the participants for your participation. And I think we've had some very inspiring conversations today, and we've been able to, thanks to UNEP and Massimiliano and Akeem and Maria and our colleague Noha, we've looked at some of the challenges that we are facing within our environments, specific to the small island Caribbean states, and then what are the implications for education systems to then, as we plan for the future, to include some of these issues, to raise awareness about these issues in the school curriculum, how teachers can have some activities around these issues, programs, we can learn lessons from programs such as Sandwatch and others, so that we expand the school walls beyond the school environment and bring the environment into our learning, teaching and learning processes, so that learners can go out and observe nature and analyze data that they may gather themselves through school projects by creating linkages between science and education, and then very concrete programs like Maria has just mentioned, the projects in the school which raise awareness amongst learners, like cleaning up the trash cans, even though these are small steps, like painting the garbage cans, they raise awareness about larger issues of having a cleaner, healthier, greener life, as Mr. Vincent Sweeney mentioned to us. And Akeem's last comment about citizenship and participation of all, which was echoed by Maria and others, leads us very nicely to our next webinar, which will take place in January, and we will soon be contacting you about that, which focuses on citizenship education and how education systems can enable youth and learners to become active citizens in their communities, whether it is issues of environment or other issues. So thank you all for your wonderful and enlightening, for this conversation. I enjoyed this conversation because we could really interact with each other and have some, discussions. I would like to take this opportunity to thank once again our director, Dr. Sadia Sanchez, for his support to enable us to initiate the Futures of Education webinars, our UNESCO headquarters in Paris, that have provided us with the technical but also financial support to launch this webinar series, and all our colleagues, Latoya, Swaby Anderson, Lucette Montgomery. I invite my colleagues to put on their, the cameras if you would like. David Jenkins, Katharina, Sean Hammer, and thank you so much, Max, because we want to work very closely between education and science. So it's very important, and we want to work with our UN sister agencies. We are delighted to work with UNEP. And I see many opportunities for us to work together. So thank you to all colleagues, all friends, and our team members who made this possible. On this note, I say thank you, and thank you for your excellent contributions. And of course, our panelists. You have been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you.